Greetings, St. Stephens. I guess you could say in many ways this month, the month of August, probably marks the point in the year when most of us have wrapped up our summer vacation plans and don't even like to think of it getting back to our normal routines of work. And maybe let's all share a collective sigh as we say goodbye to summer vacation, although some of us have a few to make yet. I don't know how much planning you put into your vacation. Some people like to go to the same places every year. Some people like to pack up and head out for a weekend, just to clear your head. And some people spend hours, even weeks, obsessing over the perfect trip. I don't know about you, but we've never had a perfect trip. Some came close, but never perfect. We all share one thing in common. We come home from vacation worn out and needing a few days to recover from our time off. Of course, a few of us can't plan a normal vacation. I read recently about a fascinating travel company called Black Tomato that offers a very special kind of vacation package. It's called a Get Lost tour. For a very large fee or amount of money, you can pay the folks at Black Tomato to send you a surprise destination in a challenging environment, like in a remote wilderness or desert. That'd be one for Tyler. Once you get to the airport, you receive, the essential information about your trip that you need to know, a satellite phone, and survival gear for your destination. I'm already not interested. But then after your surprise excursion unfolds, it's up to you to make it back to safety and civilization. Kind of sounds like that TV show, doesn't it? Survivor. It actually does sound like that. But there are no camera crew following you around. However, the company website offers this assurance. Your journey will be closely tracked by Black Tomato's experienced expedition operation teams as a safety net. Kind of like Big Brother in the woods, I guess. You won't see them, but they'll always be able to see you. That's kind of creepy, don't you think? Well, thank the Lord for that. That makes me feel much better. It takes a certain amount of courage to take a trip to a surprise destination that requires, least of all, survival gear. Most of us like to have a little bit more control when it comes to our travel plans, don't you? So once you understand a little background for today's Bible passage, you may question if Jesus was on a get lost tour of his own. It begins like this. Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. Let's stop there for a moment. Because Tyre and Sidon were Gentile cities about 50 miles away from where Jesus had last been in Galilee. Remember last week we talked about him on the lake with the disciples? So why did he travel 50 miles to Gentile territory? Did he have some urgent business there? Did he sign up for one of those get lost tours? And I think the answer to both questions is no and no. There's really no explanation provided as to why Jesus went there, but he did. So let's continue our story. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity, in other words, Tyre and Sidon, came to him crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon possessed and suffering terribly. Now, you don't imagine Jesus came 50 miles from home just to minister to this distraught mother, do you? Well, I kind of do. Who knows? After all, this is Jesus. Nobody cared about people who are hurting like him. It makes no difference their religion or where they live. It's interesting, though, to note that after his encounter with this Canaanite woman, in some texts she's called the Syrophoenician woman. I think I'd rather say Canaanite. He turns around and heads back to his usual area of ministry around the Sea of Galilee. So, it would appear that the only obvious reason Jesus might have traveled to this challenging destination was specifically to deal with and minister to this very desperate woman. And this was not just any woman. This was a Canaanite woman. And in Jesus' day, no observant kosher Jew would ever speak with a woman outside of his own family, and particularly not a Canaanite woman. They were traditionally considered enemies of the Jewish people. And it's true that at first, Jesus seems to spurn her cries for help. Matthew tells us that after she made this desperate request of him, Jesus did not answer a word. I don't think that was very encouraging to this woman, do you think? His disciples were no help either. They came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." And at this, Jesus answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Jesus' first ministry was to the lost sheep of Israel. I'm kind of surprised that this woman was not absolutely crushed at Jesus' response. But she didn't give up. There's a key. She came and knelt down before him. "Lord, help me," she said. And he replied with another crushing remark, "It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." Now it's time for Jesus to be surprised. "Yes, it is, Lord," the Canaanite woman said, "but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." People puzzle over Jesus' conversation with this woman. I mean, it seems so unlike him, doesn't it? But I wonder if Jesus wasn't giving this woman a test of her desire to have her daughter healed. But even more important, a test of her faith that he really could heal her daughter. I think she thought he could. I would suggest to you that because of the way Jesus ended this unusual story, he actually commends this woman for her great faith, kind of like the woman and the unjust judge. There are only 3 people in the Bible who were specifically commended by Jesus for their great faith. You remember who they are? One was the Roman officer who pleaded with Jesus to heal his servant. It was Jairus. And a woman who had been hemorrhaging blood for 12 years and touched the border of his robe in hopes of receiving healing. And then thirdly, this Canaanite woman who came to Jesus begging him to heal her demon-possessed daughter. The funny thing I would suggest is, though, that none of these 3 people had the right, according to Jewish law, to even approach Jesus with a request for help. They were separated from him by a huge wall of cultural and religious norms. We've already mentioned the Canaanite woman was a lowly person. She had very little status in that culture. But the woman hemorrhaging blood was ritually unclean due to her bleeding and shouldn't even have touched the border of Jesus' robe at all. As for the Roman officer, he was a representative of the Gentile government, which oppressed the Jewish people. So by law, none of these 3 people even had the right to bring their desperation to Jesus. But Jesus didn't reject them or correct them. In fact, he commended each one of them for their great faith. I don't know about you, but Jesus' definition of great faith looks different from mine. I usually equate great faith with courage or self-discipline or sacrifice. Superhero saints, if you will. Not desperate people pushing their way into Jesus' presence. But you know what? Desperate measures call for desperate action, right? Desperation is a scary state of living. None of us like that. Desperation can make us think bad things, choose bad choices. And many of us know what it's like to feel desperate, just like the Roman officer and the bleeding woman and the mother with the demon-possessed child. That agony threatens to overwhelm, and then we feel like we can't handle it. There's a very popular phrase, which I just mentioned, desperate times call for what? That's right, desperate measures. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I want to suggest to you that a more helpful phrase might be, desperate times call for Jesus. That's the real truth of the matter, isn't it? I read in Australia in 2007, an episode of the television series Mayday was interrupted by a frightening technical glitch. For 6 whole minutes on that show, a haunting audio loop played in the background, and they couldn't stop it. It was the sound of a voice repeating over and over, Jesus Christ, help us all. Lord Jesus Christ, help us all. And it repeated and repeated and repeated. And an investigation discovered that the audio loop was from a news program the previous year about soldiers firing on civilians in a foreign country. I mean, in a setting like that, a prayer would certainly be appropriate like that. Jesus Christ, help us all. Lord, Jesus Christ, help us all. But the investigation didn't reveal how an audio loop of that desperate prayer happened to interrupt a national broadcast for 6 minutes a year later. This passage about the Canaanite woman shows us that desperation doesn't disqualify you from having great faith. Neither does your gender or your social status. All that requires is a willingness to bring your desperate need to Jesus. Now, it's also interesting this woman who wasn't from the Jewish faith addressed Jesus as Lord. She called him Lord. That's key. She knew who he was. She knew he had the power to heal her daughter. And the word she used refers to the one who is supreme or master. How did she know? Even when Jesus' own disciples weren't sure of him and his claims, this foreigner recognized who he was. She knew that the power of life was in his hands. And somehow she knew he was her only hope.